Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. We have to figure out we have a feedback loop coming through here somehow, and I don't see anywhere it is. But anyway, welcome to the show. I am really excited about tonight's show. Unfortunately, Alejandro is on the road traveling, and he said, "Oh darn, he just can't. He's not going to be anywhere where he can actually talk with us." So he is not going to be on the show. But I have a show with what I consider two really wonderful, nice guys tonight. Sam Moranto is joining us from Chicago in the beginning of the show. And then after that, we have Preston Dennett, and he has written a book about Schoolyard UFOs, and we're going to be talking all about that. I want to thank everyone that helps out with the show, and that means people behind the scenes and also the people that help support the show. And anybody can do that. All you have to do is go over to podcastufo.com. All that information's over there. We're also on Patreon as well. And I was just this last Sunday, what was that, 2 days ago, I was on the Paracast and had a really good conversation with Randall and Gene over there. And you can check that out over at the Paracast. And level-headed, great conversations. And also, I mean, it was a real pleasure. And I've been thinking, maybe I'll get both of them at different times on this show. It'd be a lot of fun. I was really impressed at how knowledgeable both of them are. Randall, who I'd never talked to before, really knew his stuff, and it was a lot of fun. And also, let's see what else we have here. If anyone would like to get a shout out if you support the show, I'd be happy to do that. And I think I'm trying to read this. I was sent a long email. I simply asked David and Heather if I could do a shout out in Phoenix for them. And he just wrote me a long email back, and I'm hoping somewhere in that email he says, yeah, go ahead. And I hope it doesn't say don't do a shout out. But anyway, so anyone that supports the show, I'd be glad to do a shout out for you. Just email me and tell me if you want me to use your full name or just first name. And that's Martin at podcastufo.com. And I am getting my good buddy here from Chicago on right now, Sam Moranto. Welcome to the show.
Boy, it's good to be back and great to hear your voice. It was also magnificent to hear that wonderful Race Hobbs. Oh my gosh, what a wonderful voice.
I know, what a radio voice, huh?
One of a kind.
Hey, what do you think of my hat? I
love it, actually. Yeah.
All the time I say, well, I'm not necessarily saying it's aliens. Well, my hat says it's aliens. Anyway, Sam, so this is not a typical news segment. I just wanted to have you on because there's always something going on out in the Chicago way. And when I found out Alejandro couldn't be on, I thought, hey, well, let's see if Sam can be on. Sam, first of all, I know this is the near anniversary of a couple of major sightings. Let's see, was it November 7th? O'Hare, is that when that was?
You got it. 4:20 or so in the afternoon, gate C17, object sitting below ceiling of approximately 1,900 feet, and it's about 450 feet below that. This object is sitting there looking much like, to some degree we keep hearing about this tic-tac, but if you look at a disc object from a side angle, it's just a matter of where you're looking at it, your vantage point. This object sat there for a good 20-plus minutes. I had the privilege of speaking to 3 people who saw it, a couple of other individuals who were talking to people on the radio who weren't able to see it themselves, but were able to communicate with them as they were watching it. And there is absolutely no doubt that this object that bolted through the sky that day was not a lenticular cloud that went through that some 6,000 feet of ceiling of cloud layer that sat there and bolted through in an instant, to the point that people were gasping and reacting with shock. So when you hear these crazy stories that so-called skeptics come up with, you could just remind them to take a peek at the NARCAP Scientific Technical Report number 10, and that's at narcap.org. Read the details on that, and if that isn't enough information, I believe it's darn near 200 some pages of very good scientific evaluation. And oh yes, my interviews are in there, so I definitely was part of the case itself. Somebody said I wasn't. I don't know how that happened, but I most certainly was.
Now,
And yes, that was on the November the 7th, 2006.
Now, you just mentioned it wasn't a cloud, and I'm going to ask you: are you addressing? I don't know if you listened to when I had Seth Shostak on. I don't know, what was it, 3 weeks ago? But he's the one who he actually said it was a cloud. Is that kind of why you're addressing that in particular?
Yes, in particular, I'm addressing that. Plus, there was an astronomer from the Adler who came on. It was an interview that I was supposed to attend. I didn't have time to get down there and do it. It was one of these last-minute phone calls. They wanted me in studio to do an interview. But that notion was brought up stating that, we know what it was, a lenticular cloud. First of all, lenticular clouds are rarely seen in the Midwest. You have to have a pretty good wind to create that. And you'll find them on the leeward side of a mountain,
right?
Or, for instance, something very tall. You do get them in the Midwest, but they're extremely rare. One of my witnesses, my main witness, was a person who did a lot of mountain climbing. And when she heard lenticular cloud, she said, well, that was just a bunch of caca, is how she referred to it. And there's no way possible that that was the case. And this object sat there. She was evaluating it as from the point of what kind of construction it was actually made of. She was a military brat. Her father was the captain of an air wing for the Navy, and she was raised in the environment of aviation, and she knew the proper terminology when she came to analyzing the object. She was also a reporter and a very smart person. She was a talking head for one of the television stations out there. So in Washington, this was somebody that knew what she was talking about. Plus, we had pilots, we had ground traffic personnel that were taxiing 737s back and forth to their hangars. They seen it. Bottom line, this object was there. I can't say it was something that was from out of this world, but it exhibited some extremely remarkable technology.
Wow. Yeah, another real mystery, as they say. And I know I've asked you this question. It just seems like it's a matter of time before, a pilot will retire. The retirement age for a commercial pilot is 65, so they have to retire at 65. And it just seems like some should have retired by now that would want to talk about actually seeing this object.
I'm hoping that is the case. One individual I did speak to was at a retirement, was a senior group, and this gentleman was a manager handling security underground, built between Gate C-17, the gates, C concourse and B concourse, and was managing the oversight of inspecting the luggage for security. And he heard the chatter back and forth, and he called his friend in the B concourse, was a manager, and he was giving him a complete, a very well detailed observation of what he was seeing. And he said, by no accounts was that even remotely anything resembling a cloud. It was an object, cut and dry. It was an object.
Well, I've been texting, so I'm going to have to actually say this, and I apologize for having to say this, but some people are saying that there's no audio over on KGRA radio currently. So, Race, if you can hear me, you may want to check that out. They do have audio on YouTube because people are commenting about what we're talking about. So, you and I were talking a little bit earlier, just chatting, and you said that Mothman, I know this isn't UFOs, but Mothman just won't go away. What's going on with that?
Oh, that varmint! I tell you what, we had another report that came in. You know, the whole series of Mothman reports that came into MUFON, which were about 10 of them. Two of them, one was a call in, one was an email that came in through the Illinois MUFON website, not from the MUFON CMS. You know, most of these, if not all of them, except for two, I should say, all except for two, had no contact information. Everything was just voided or fictitious. And the details, there was a lot of information there. It was just absolutely incorrect. People being outside during the rain, stating that they were seeing the reflection of the moon in the eye of the creature while they're out on Lake Michigan in 3 to 7 foot waves. At 10 o'clock at night, the moon wasn't up till 11:43. I mean, we understand all the things that cannot be altered and are just scientifically definitely solid as far as verifiable evidence, and yet they come up with all this nonsense. It seemed like all of them had some very good creative writing in play and some highly convincing narratives. And this is the same thing that's been going on. But now what's going on is they're trying to turn it, and all of a sudden the investigators are the bad guys because we're asking questions. We'd like to have the people go out to the location, point out exactly where something is, so we could do the usual scientific stuff like figure out how high something is in the air, see if we could triangulate it, get some idea on the size of the actual object. Nothing like this can go on unless you have some help. And this is a nonsense, but it's starting up again. Wouldn't it be nice to have some cryptid thing floating around that we could actually nail down and say, here, we could add this to the books of some new cryptid thing, you know, being whatever it is, if it's extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or just one more freaky thing that we missed somehow, and it's been living in the bushes. Who knows? But all the new reports are coming around from the area around the O'Hare Field, which is not a good place to go flying around if you're 7 foot tall.
Wow. I didn't have any idea that it was ever around the airport. Is this something new?
Yes, this is a new area that we're starting to get the reports from. And again, some of the information just doesn't add up, the timelines. But then again, all these reports, the minute you start asking to have a phone interview or any other form of contact, they insist that you're meddling, that you're being too pushy, that they wish to stay anonymous. If you call in or if you send a report in anonymous, you're already there. I can't grant anonymity to something that isn't known. It's like that's an impossible act. So the bottom line is, if you're going to fill out a report, expect to get some sort of communication from us to at least get more detail to help you figure out what it is. And that's all we're interested in doing.
Yeah. Wow. Hey, Sam, I can't believe how much the time has just flown by. It seems like we just started chatting here. Anyway, thanks so much. I appreciate you filling in for our good friend, Alejandro. And you take care out in Chicago, and my best to Julie, and we'll talk soon.
Yes, take care. I'll see you.
All right. All right, everyone. So our guest coming up now is Preston Dennett. And Preston has been on, I think, at least two times ahead. Real fun guy, nice guy. Always enjoy speaking with him. And he has been investigating UFOs and the paranormal all the way back since 1986. He's written several books. I think 24 books and over 100 articles on UFO and paranormal. And again, I just always enjoy speaking with him. And welcome to the show, Preston.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
All right. There you are. I'm seeing you. But I'm not seeing you on the... I don't know what's going on with Skype tonight. But it's not...
Not behaving?
It's not behaving. Let me just see if I can change... There you are. Okay. All right, I'm going to do some adjustments on this end. All right, here you go. We're going to put you on. Here you go. So, Preston, for the person who has never heard you on the show, why don't you give a quick background and what got you interested in the topic, all that good stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was originally born in Illinois, moved here to California with my family. I've got 5 brothers and sisters. And I thought we were all skeptical of UFOs. It turns out no. Some of them had seen UFOs and didn't tell me. I was very skeptical. It wasn't until 1986, November 17th, I think it was exactly, there was a sighting over Alaska. Captain Kenju Tsurushi. It's a very famous case.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this pilot is obviously lying. Or he's on drugs. I mean, what is going on? Because the news just kind of laughed about it. They were very tongue-in-cheek and moved on. But I remembered my brother had said he'd seen a UFO, and I didn't believe him. And I asked him about it and got a real shock. You know, he had 2 friends with him. He chased this metallic disc for several miles in his car. And I started asking people and found out that, you know, not only, you know, some of the people within my family, but my friends and my coworkers as well, not only had sightings, but missing time and, you know, face-to-face encounters with gray ETs. So, yeah, it hit home for me. You know, as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't good news. I was pretty upset about it, really.
Really, that's, you know, sometimes I hear kind of that reaction, but sometimes mostly about someone that has their own sighting, but not generally when they're listening to other people's accounts. Are you saying this reaction of yours has to do more of like it was something that you didn't know about, sort of like a secret out there, and all of a sudden you know about it, so why was your reaction the way it was? I guess what I'm looking for.
I guess I had a lot of anger because this wasn't taught in schools, and the people I thought, you know, who loved me were lying essentially. And I get it, you know, that I was vehemently skeptical. I was taking all kinds of science classes in college, and I was, you know, dug in terms of, you know, UFOs not being real. So it was a big adjustment for sure, and finding out that our own government is using our own tax dollars to basically ridicule witnesses and cover up events and, you know, cover up the truth really upset me. So it was not good news. I mean, it was very interesting. I became obsessed very quickly. Bought all the books I could, magazines. I subscribed to MUFON, became a member or a field investigator. I was tromping through the fields. I was going to see if these things were real.
Wow. And what was your investigation like when you worked for MUFON? Did you work with MUFON? Did you have any really interesting cases that you personally investigated?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I worked directly with MUFON for a number of years early on and just kind of fed some cases to them. And mostly sightings and things like that. Don't work so much with MUFON these days. I'm still a field investigator and a member. I support them. I think there's a lot of really good people in MUFON. But like every citizen UFO organization in the U.S., there's problems with them. I mean, this is what we saw with APRO, who was essentially spied on by the CIA. The Lorenzens caught them doing it. And what's the other one? Not APRO, not QFOS, NICAP. That, of course, fell apart due to infiltration. So, you know, and MUFON, I love them, but their membership is what, a few thousand? Why isn't it 100,000? I don't understand this.
That's always puzzled me too, and it's not likely it's an expensive membership. I've had a few discussions with Jan Hauerzan about, you know, how he tries to get members involved. And now I see they have a new like MUFON TV show. I watched part of it the other day. Maybe they're trying to get experimental and trying to figure out ways to get more members involved. But yeah, it is surprisingly a low membership. And I know the controversy, and there's some people that have just plain left because of it. And I think whenever something like you mentioned, whenever something like this can easily get out of hand in different ways. The politics of it and the whole thing. Yeah. And then anytime when there's money involved, weird things can happen too. So I know they've had their struggles.
Well, I like Jan. I met him, at the conference in Irvine when I spoke there, and I'm hopeful for this all continuing in a good path. Mm-hmm. But we have to remember that this is a real subject. UFOs are real. The evidence, I think, is conclusive, really, within the public arena, if you're willing to search it out. And there is a cover-up. It's demonstrable. And it hasn't stopped yet.
Right.
So there's push and pull forces here that are making it very difficult to move this subject forward.
Right. Let's see. I think we're going into break right now. So we're going to go into our first break. I know there was a little bit of an issue over there at KGR Radio. And so hang in, everyone. We're going to be right back right after these messages.
All right, Martin, we're clear. Sorry about that, man.
Yeah, that's all right. And
I had to break the signal when I heard that you guys were having feedback. If something happened, it came from my end on one of the measurements on this Motu. So,
all right,
that piece of equipment that I told you we hooked up.
oh dear. Okay.
Yeah. So I just didn't have. Apparently, I didn't have one of the switches switched, and he remotely came in and fixed it. Man, that is the amazing part of this electronic stuff.
Wow. All right. Well, we're still live on YouTube. How much time we got till the commercial break?
3 minutes, Martin.
3 minutes. All right. Okay. Preston, so we're going to get into your book because I find that really fascinating, the Schoolyard UFO Encounters. But first of all, in your area, what part of California do you live in?
Southern California, outside LA, in Reseda.
And what's the fires? How are you dealing with that out there?
Boy, just a couple of weeks ago, it was pretty scary. I mean, I had fires on both sides of me. I personally was in no danger, but my family, my brother and sister-in-law were just about getting ready to evacuate.
Wow.
And have other people who are in direct path of the fires in Northern California. So it's been horrendous. Yeah, it's a big deal. I've lived here for a long time, since 1971, and wildfires are nothing new. But not like this. I have to tell you, they don't race across and just demolish 1,000 homes in minutes.
That's right. And I know we're doing a show about UFOs, but I do want to talk a little bit about this because I think it's actually scary and interesting at the same time. But I went out to California a few years ago visiting, and I went up to Yosemite, and I couldn't believe what I saw with the beetle kill. That happens when there's a drought and the trees can't produce enough sap to protect themselves against the beetle. And so the beetles will kill these trees. But I mean, what a fire hazard Yosemite, which is such a beautiful area, what a fire hazard Yosemite itself is. And I'm surprised that doesn't torched. It's just so much what do they call it? Tinder, just waiting to light there. But I don't know if it's going to get any better in California. I mean, it's like there's not too. It seems like there's most of this. The wooded areas have been hit one way or another in the last few years. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, there's still a lot of forest out there, thank God. And I think at some point this has got to stabilize. If we work on our environment, it's the number one message from the ETs, by the way, environmentalism.
Mm.
when
Yeah, I
someone's
want to
taken on
talk.
board.
Yeah, I would like to. That's one of the things I want to talk about because, a lot of these schoolyard encounters they do have messages like that, and we're about ready to
Martin, we're
go.
ready to go back when you are, my
All right,
friend.
I was just going to say we're ready to go back on. So,
Yeah, I hate to interrupt you guys. I
nope,
can
always
always
do
buy
that.
a few minutes.
Yep.
But yeah. Okay. Preston, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, Martin, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, everyone, welcome back. This is Martin Willis, and my guest is Preston Dennett, and we're going to be talking about schoolyard encounters, and that's where we're going to start. Preston, so what made you decide you were going to write this book about these encounters, which, by the way, is one of the most interesting aspects of this phenomena as far as I'm concerned?
Yeah, I kind of slipped into it by chance. Coincidentally, one of my early cases, my first humanoid case, actually took place right in front of an elementary school. So I started running into these cases early on, and of course, when the Rua, Zimbabwe case occurred, I'm like, wow, this is really unusual. I thought it was unusual, and but I kept hearing more cases. I ran into another of my own down in Hawthorne at a Catholic school, and thought, gosh, I wonder if this is a thing, because I'd been looking into various areas that I call UFO attractors, sort of like mines, metal mines, iron mines, copper mines, attract UFOs. So do rocket launches, anything to do with rockets, nuclear stations. And I thought, I wonder if schools are a thing, because I had heard of course, the Westall, Melbourne case at Westall High School, where some 200 kids saw a UFO land, 300. And I thought, gosh, I think there's another. I remembered one up in Wales where they saw humanoids. I did not know about the Opalaka Crestview case. So I thought, these are all the more famous cases. And so I decided to dig in a little bit, because I had read this case where a student had said that he had grays walk into his classroom during class. And yeah, time stopped, and these grays were just going up and down the aisles. No one was moving, and at this point he couldn't move, he couldn't talk. And suddenly they were gone, time speeded up again, and everyone acted like nothing had happened. And I thought, oh my God, our school's being targeted by UFOs. So I did a sort of a survey of the literature, starting with the books in my library and magazines and UFO News Clipping Service. I checked out MUFON and NUFORC and other UFO databases. And I have to tell you, I got a real shock. Having investigated UFOs for, 30 years now, most of my life. I thought I knew pretty much what was going on. And this really threw me for a loop, because I found over 100 cases pretty quickly.
That's amazing.
Right? All over the world, stretching back, gosh, the earliest one I found was 1853. It's an outlier. That's in Tennessee. These UFOs hovered over a college. But really starting in 1950 and onward from that year, at least 3 high-quality cases per year, all the way up pretty much to the present day.
I think, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, the topic of schoolyard encounters came up, and I believe I said, yeah, I think there's at least 4 or 5 of them. I had no idea. If you had told me there was 100, at that time I would have, I wouldn't say I wouldn't believe you, but I mean, it's just, I can't believe there's that many. That's just amazing. And, we know of, like you just mentioned, too, that, I'm very familiar with. And by the way, on December 10th, we have Ryan Shane is going to be on about the Westall encounter, December 10th. So, but the Ariel School, to me, is one of the major ones. Just because of, there's so many reasons why, the 65 or whatever it was, school children, and so many of them, saw the beings. And speaking of beings, how many of these encounters, I don't know if you can try to make a stab at how many of them had actual being sightings in all those 100.
Yeah, 10% at least. Actually, what I found was, it surprised me, 30% of the cases involve landings and or humanoids. So what we're dealing with are not, first of all, it's not a coincidence. This is not like random flybys. Your average kind of sighting is about 4,000 feet up, an anomalous light at night, very brief, and it darts away, right? That's not what's happening here. These cases are fundamentally different in several really profound and significant ways, I think. First of all, being that these are very low-level sightings, I would say that 1,000 feet would be on the higher end for these objects. They come down to usually 200 feet, 150. And yeah, like I said, in some cases landing. These objects are directly targeting the schools. They're appearing from, say, the horizon or way up in the sky and come right over the school, perhaps circling around it, but usually stopping right over it or landing next to it, usually behind the school in a grove of trees when they do land. What's also unusual about these cases is they occur during daytime, which, most sightings are at night. So this is a significant difference and also removes the possibility of misperception. Another thing is they last a long time. 10 minutes would be sort of the shorter end. 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. A couple of these cases occur over a period of days or even a week.
Wow.
Of repeated visits. Yeah, not at all unusual. Also unusual is the fact that we're not dealing with your average amount of 4 to 7 witnesses. We are dealing with an average of 30 witnesses per case. In many cases there's 40, 50, 100, 200, 400 witnesses.
Wow.
And not just students, by the way. Teachers in about half the cases. There's often a governmental response. There's military or state government, police. There's also a wave of publicity usually that follows these sightings that they generally do make the local newspapers, sometimes international. But yeah, something crazy is definitely going on with these types of cases. And one more quick thing is half of the cases are elementary schools.
Yeah, we talked just for a couple minutes before the show, and I was saying to you that I think one of the reasons these sightings are happening is because kids are very impressionable. And when you're going back to elementary schools, that even makes the case even a little stronger. And how many of these cases are you aware of where the kids are actually outside, like on the playground or something like that? Is there a good percentage of that?
Yeah, 90.
Really?
Really most of them, yeah. And what we do see is that these things show up during recess. It seems, to be happening so consistently that I just can't imagine this is a coincidence. There are a number of cases where kids are in their classroom, and these objects hover right outside the school and cause, classroom chaos, to say the least. But most of the cases, the kids are on the playground. It's usually, early morning recess, lunchtime, or school has just been let out. Number of cases just like that.
Wow.
So, I think it's intentional, and these ETs are, because what we often, I do believe we're dealing with ETs, just to put that out there, extraterrestrials in the classic sense. I think that they're casing the joint, if you know what I mean. They're scouting the area out prior to this, because often in these cases there are sightings before the event and after. That was certainly true in the Ariel case.
So are you saying before the actual event of the encounter, there's sightings after and before? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, particularly in the case of the landings. What we see is in the cases where the UFOs are landing next to schools, the day before that there'll often be sightings. And after that, for that matter. Yeah. Not always, but certainly it is a pattern.
So it is almost like they're scouting it out in a way. And And I want to go over some of the cases, but you mentioned sometime the military gets involved. Can you talk about any of the cases where that is the case?
Yeah, I think probably the one that comes to mind would be the Marysville, Ohio, the Jerome Elementary School. I have the date for that somewhere around here. Uh, yeah, 1954, October 22nd. Great case, really amazing. Uh, Began when a bunch of children, about 60 children, were on the playground and saw this sort of football-shaped object with very bright lights, perhaps portholes, but probably lights because it was very bright. Came swooping down to about 200 feet and hovered there for a good 5 or 10 minutes before some kids decided, maybe we better call the teachers, and called out the principal, Mr. Dimmick, and he was amazed. He's never seen anything like it. Says it was so bright he had to shield his eyes. He immediately called for another teacher. She ran out and didn't see it because this thing darts away at full speed. But sighting wasn't over yet. At this point, the sky fills with this sort of cotton candy-like substance, which we now know is angel hair.
Mm-hmm.
It's relatively rare. There's quite a number of cases, but not a lot compared to the number of sightings that are out there. And this is just sort of this weird spiderweb type substance. And it was thick all over the playground. It targeted the school. It was, in my mind, clearly a display of some kind done intentionally. I don't think this is UFO exhaust or anything. I think they put this out there for the kids. I really do. And I can tell you why. But at any rate, they scooped it up. They brought some to the teachers. The teachers fussed around with it. They sent a sample to the local newspaper, who sent a sample to Lockport Air Force Base, and they never heard back from them. But the Air Force did express interest in this case, particularly, and seemed to express interest in all the cases where there's perhaps photographs taken or moving films, or another case just like this 1 year later, Whitsitt Elementary School, another angel hair fall case, where the Air Force showed up to interview people and tried to debunk the case. But turns out the principal who saw this, this is also Whitsitt Elementary School, he witnessed the whole thing. Turns out he was a World War II vet who had flown like 30-some combat missions and new aircraft and was just not having what this Air Force major was trying to do, which was debunk the case.
Oh, wow. So you talked about the angel hair. I know there was a case, I can't remember anything about it, other than that it was found, they found a bunch of it in the trees. I know it was a woman witness. And has any of that ever been tested? Actually, you mentioned that the Air Force never got back to anyone, but have people tested it otherwise?
Oh, yeah, certainly in other cases. And in the Whitsitt Elementary School case, they did send a sample off to Burlington Scientific Labs, who returned it saying they were not able to identify it as other than possibly an organic substance, and they thought it might be spider webs, and recommended, which it couldn't be because there was this was thick on the playground. Wow. At any rate, they did send it to a biologist, and the biologist said flat out, no, this is not spider webs. There's no evidence of spiders here. The strands are way too even. And it does. Chemical analysis has shown, I forget what the actual elements are in there, but I remember boron is one of them, which isn't a super common element, but is something we use for nuclear shielding of reactors, I believe. So that kind of piqued my interest. I'm like, I wonder if there's something to that. But generally, the substance dissolves very quickly. It's extremely hard to gather samples of. So there hasn't been a whole lot of study of it, but there has been some.
Wow. Now, are there any other, as far as you know, are there any other trace evidence cases when it comes to schoolyard sightings?
Oh, yeah. There was a case in South Africa at Richmond High School, where, I believe it was Richmond, where a UFO landed on the high school tennis courts overnight. The guy who, again, it was principal, by coincidence, actually lived next to the school, saw these lights outside his window. There was some security guards who saw it, and I believe another police officer saw it. So a number of witnesses saw these strange lights, and the next morning they go to these tennis courts where these lights were, and they were tore up. And they couldn't figure out how it was done because they were locked up in secure fencing. The gates weren't disturbed, the fences weren't damaged, but the blue gum tree next to the tennis courts was all burnt. The floor of the tennis courts was tore up all over the place, and they found some of the tar several hundred yards away on a mountainside, a little hillside. So that was curious. Yeah, they have no idea what exactly happened in that case, but that's one of a number of landing trace cases. I know the Westall case had some pretty significant landing traces. There's a number of cases with physiological reactions as well. So yeah, and there was, let's see, the Moline, Illinois case, Sacred Heart Elementary School. 40 children and 3 nuns saw this UFO hovering over it. There was a police officer who had a movie camera and was able to take footage of it. I saw the footage. It's not great by today's standards, but it's really, in my mind, great evidence because we have so many witnesses supporting this. We know it's not a hoax, and certainly the Air Force showed a lot of interest in it, and the guy who took the footage, the police officer, was actually visited by so-called men in black who refused to identify themselves, right? Perhaps the government type as opposed to the sort of weirder alien type. But some, government officials from some unnamed agency who expressed a lot of interest in his film and wanted to see it.
I was just looking over the list, and there is, I've never heard of any of these. So you mentioned in your research that you went into, say, your books and then your articles, and then and you mentioned something about newspaper clips. It must be so hard to find these. Or can someone actually find a lot of these through the internet?
I cast a pretty wide net. I've got a pretty big library. I subscribe to the UFO news clipping service before, there was internet. And I found some really wonderful databases. I have to tell you, MUFON and NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center, had a lot of information. APRO, QFOs, NICAP, lots of the magazines. So yeah, I did cast a wide net. I traced some of the cases myself, and was able to talk to witnesses firsthand. So yeah, it was definitely a real research project, for sure. But boy, when I found one of these cases, I'm like, wow, here's this pattern again exerting itself, where this UFO shows up at recess. And these are displays. Clearly, these UFOs are showing themselves off on purpose. It's a sort of UFO behavior that's not super common, but turns up regularly. And that's what they're doing in these cases, for sure.
Let's talk about, we'll get into the different cases, the unknown cases that I'm interested in. But let's talk about, earlier you said something along the lines of, the environment, the message. Are there a lot of cases where people actually, children are mentioning, that they either had a vision or they felt like they were communicated with? And if so, what kind of percentage of that is what we've heard in the past about environmental, related?
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of direct communication cases. There's a smattering of them. The Rua, Zimbabwe case is really the ultimate case of this kind, which has all the elements, including, landing, humanoids, multiple witnesses. No teachers saw that one, though.
Well, one has come. When I was speaking to James Fox out in Phoenix, he told me that there was one teacher that admitted to him that she actually saw it and she kept quiet about it. So,
oh, wow.
So he did get an interview with her. It's going to be in his film when it comes out. Whenever that is, hopefully it'll be soon. But yeah, that'll be interesting to hear her side of it.
Yeah, but most of them, don't have messages. It's certainly the most common message I hear when someone's taken on board a craft, regardless of the date of their encounter or the type of ET they're interacting with. That's the number one message people are given. And it was there in the Rua, Zimbabwe case. There's only, a couple of other cases where people got any message at all. So that is actually really rare.
Oh, yeah. I was hoping there would be more of those because I just find it really, really an added, amazing element to the whole situation. And you mentioned a couple of times there's principals. How often would you say are faculty involved in actually, seeing these things? Is it rare, or is it, half and half, or what is it?
It's about half. It's hard to say for sure because a lot of these cases aren't really thoroughly investigated. And I'm just astonished at how many cases there are where there's elementary age witnesses who see this stuff and there are no teachers who are admitting it, at least. So what we're like the Rua Zimbabwe case, well, I found out there's a teacher there just now. I think that we're seeing that's probably more likely the case, that a lot of these teachers are just not going to talk about it. Whereas students, children are unencumbered by society and preconceptions, which I think actually makes them great witnesses in a lot of ways.
Right.
They're often marginalized, unfortunately, in terms of being UFO witnesses or really witnesses in any event. There's that old adage, children should be seen and not heard. And that was truer back then, than it is now. My phone's ringing. Sorry about that. But yeah, I think that this is actually a lot more common, and teachers see them probably in at least half the cases, probably more. But there's a bunch of cases there where it's just the kids.
One of the things I thought was really made the case a little extra credible about the Ariel school is when I spoke to Salma Siddiq, she said that the term UFO or anything like that she'd never known about. They're kind of remote. And so that wasn't something that she would have ever conceived or thought of on her own, when she was actually seeing this. I think I heard either Emily or her, the two witnesses I've spoken to, one of them said they thought it must be something like military or something like that. They were just trying to figure things out. And are there any other cases that you're aware of where it was sort of in a remote area, or most of these like, in the suburbs or urban areas?
Gosh, I have never been asked that before. I think they're mostly suburban. I'm trying to think of any really remote areas. I mean, this occurs all over the world.
Yeah.
So we're seeing cases in England, Canada, France, all across South America, Africa, Australia, across Europe. So most of them are, in town, I guess you would say, not rural areas. And it's puzzling because cases like the Opelika, Florida case, Crestview Elementary School in 1966, had a number of these objects hovering over the school. One landed, some 200 kids saw this, as well as the teachers. There's an airport like 2 miles away who claims to have seen nothing. That's true with the Westall case in Melbourne, Australia. That's true with the case in New Zealand in 1970, where there were 400 students on the playground, 2 teachers. It's a great case. The teachers suddenly realized something was up when the students weren't playing. All the sounds of their playing had stopped. And they look up and there's this giant thing approaching their playground. It's huge. It gets bigger and bigger. It's this sort of black disc and glistening and glinting in the sun there, and gets right over the school and covering a third of the sky, they said. Very large, hovered for about 10 minutes, and eventually moved off a little bit and then took off straight up. There's an airport right next door. They called him up, of course, and nothing.
Wow.
So, I think what we're looking at here is a situation where they're showing off themselves to a select group. And you could be at the airport and you're not going to see this unless they're all lying, which is entirely possible. But I don't know, because I keep seeing this in case after case where it's just the school who's seeing this.
I'm trying to remember which case it is. It might be Westall. I believe that's the case where the film was actually confiscated from a teacher. Is that a common theme? We're going into a break here in just a minute, but is that a common thing as far as you know?
No, it's not super common. And yes, that is the Westall case, which was another one of the ultimate cases. There's 6 really big cases, and that's one of them, where there was an active sort of attempt to cover up events, which was pretty successful for a long time, thanks to the work of Shane Ryan.
Yeah.
It's come out now, and but yeah, that doesn't happen a lot because people don't really haven't taken a lot of pictures, and those that have were well received and published in newspapers and so on.
I believe I don't know, a half hour ago I mentioned that Shane Ryan was coming on December 10th, and I believe I called him Ryan Shane. I may have, I don't know, but anyway, yeah, he's a nice guy. He did a lot of really good work on that. So we're going to go into the break now. So everyone, this is our real break. We're going to go into that, and we'll be back right after these messages. All right, everyone, welcome back. This is Martin Willis. My guest tonight is Preston Dennett, and we are discussing Schoolyard UFOs, to me, one of the most fascinating aspects of the UFO phenomenon. So, Preston, as far as where these sightings are happening, are you aware? This is one place you don't hear a lot from, and I'm just wondering, did you ever find out any information of any of these happening in China?
Gosh, I think so. Yeah, I think there was a couple of Chinese cases. Yeah, there was. Now that I think of it, Paul Dong, the Chinese UFO researcher, he published a book called UFOs Over China, and I found a couple of cases in there which were very significant. There was one that occurred over a major university. 3 students saw it, caused quite an uproar, and a year after that, all the UFO groups started to form in China, which are very popular now. So it seemed I think that there's an agenda behind a lot of these sightings, in that it's to sort of wake people up to their presence in a sort of sneaky way, not underhanded, but sort of a quiet way, because people aren't going to listen to children as they would to adults. There are large gatherings of people all over the world daily, and yet we're not seeing UFOs hovering over, well, there are some over concerts and, sports games, but not a lot.
Right.
Certainly nowhere near the numbers we see here. So there's something to that for sure. And worldwide.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't get any cases out of Russia, which for whatever reasons I wasn't able to find any big database enough, I guess. But I'm sure that there's more out there.
Yeah. I'm heading that way again. I don't know how many times it's been now. I'm going to be there in a couple of weeks for about a month. I'll be doing the show. There may be one show I may not be able to do, but I'm going to be doing the show. I'm going to get up in the middle of the night there and keep the show going at the same time if I can do it. But I've tried to connect with people in Russia to talk about UFOs because I wore a hat and a T-shirt over there, and there are people actually stopping me, that have an interest in UFOs. And I know there was that one. I think I had Peter Robbins talk about it one time. That one really great case in a park where there was a lot of children involved. It was not a schoolyard one, but so it's happening there. There are people really interested in. I had one guy that was very involved in the Ural Mountains and the Dyatlov Pass incident, and investigator. But he said his English was just so bad he didn't want to be on the show. But it's anyway. I digress here. But going back to schoolyards, what about the cover-ups? You talked a little bit about that. Is that like a common theme of these?
Yeah, and I think it depends on how you really sort of define cover-up. because what we see is, in a number of cases where kids will see it and the teachers even will see it, but the teachers say don't talk about it, and they won't talk about it. And while the kids are buzzing and it's, the talk of the school for days, it goes no farther than that, really, because the teachers will not talk about it. In my mind, that's a cover-up to a certain extent,
Mm-hmm.
but more properly speaking, there are cases involving government cover-up. Probably the ultimate example would be the Westall High School case, in which some 300 students saw a UFO, multiple UFOs. One landed right next to the school, right in the grove of trees there, which is the pattern we see, and like I mentioned earlier, always landing in a grove of trees right next to the school. It's very interesting to me. And, this was very well observed. People ran right up to this object and were feet away from it. It lifted up. There was landing traces. Hundreds of kids saw the landing traces. But they ran back to the school, and by the time everyone was back in the school, the Army had already showed up. The police were there. The press was there. And they called a special assembly, which basically the headmaster said, don't talk about this. UFOs aren't real. If you think you saw a UFO, you're mistaken. And at the same time, kids were being taken individually into offices and questioned by military personnel and told not to talk about it.
Wow. I wasn't aware of that part. I'll have to talk to Shane about that. What would you say is the most recent case of a schoolyard sighting?
I found a number of recent cases from 2019 where people,
Really?
but mostly involving individual witnesses looking at objects hovering very low over schools, which is if I were to just write every schoolyard case like that, it'd be a much bigger book.
Yeah.
Because this book is really about cases involving multiple witnesses in most instances.
Mm-hmm.
Not always, but yeah, there was about 4 or 5 cases scattered throughout the U.S. that I found for this year. The most recent landing was actually, there was a really interesting sighting in 2019 over Indonesia, where the students were freaking out. This was during the day. It was a very bright object, bright like the sun, bright. And the teacher was actually able to film it on her cell phone, but you couldn't see anything. It was just light. So it was not useful footage. But again, this was a very low-level sighting. And what I found is these occur about once per year. Starting in 1950 is really when it all began at this little school called Preston in Prestonburg, Kentucky, by coincidence. Prestonburg. I laughed when I saw that, where 35 students and the teacher saw multiple objects, which were very loud and came buzzing over the school twice and scared the wits out of the student. They thought it was the end of the world. So this was another sort of active display, and this is the pattern we see in each of these cases. About one per year, and I think it's probably a lot more than that. I mean, I've got 100 some cases in the book. I'm guessing it's closer to 1,000, or I wouldn't be surprised if it's 10,000
in total throughout time.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned a case back in the 1800s. Are there other ones back that far, or was that just a really rare occurrence?
Yeah, Burritt College in Tennessee, just a complete outlier. I could not find a single case prior to 1950 besides that one.
Wow.
But that one fit the same pattern. It was early morning. Professors saw this, students saw it. It hovered for 2 objects, bright. They were pulsating. One would be bright and then one dim, kind of putting on this, what appeared to be some sort of weird display for 20, 30 minutes.
And what year was that?
1853.
Oh, wow. So 1853, think of it. You didn't even have the hydrogen balloons that they used in the Civil War. They weren't even, they did have, they've had hot air balloons, of course, since the 18th or even earlier, very early, but not used too much. But still, what would explain something like that, especially when it comes to, did you say lights?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's pretty good observations that we can say that this is not ball lightning or certainly any aircraft. They tried to attribute it to some astronomical or atmospheric phenomena, but it wasn't northern lights. I mean, these were, defined objects or lights that would pulsate on and off, or dim in brightness and then become very brilliant for a long time, in place.
Yeah,
So
20 minutes. That is quite amazing. Yeah, you wouldn't think of a natural phenomena like ball lightning. I don't think it can last that long. I'm not sure.
Well, it's really interesting because most of these cases involve metallic craft with portholes that are just classic UFOs, like what happened in Scotland, 1952, at Elder Park Elementary School. School just let out. Everyone's going across the front yard there. Teachers are there, janitors. When this giant circular shadow comes over the playground, blazes across it, and there's this huge sombrero-shaped object hovering right over the school, about 300 feet up, I think it was, and stayed there for about 5 to 10 minutes. The main witness, she's described a sense of timelessness. She says, I really couldn't tell you how long it was. And boy, that piqued my interest because, like I said, I've got a few time stop cases, and the sense of timelessness turns up quite a bit. That turned up in the Rua, Zimbabwe case. Some of the witnesses said that it was as if in slow motion. And this object just sort of darts away over Glasgow and, of course, made the newspapers and convinced a lot of parents who did not believe their students when they came home, their children, claiming they'd seen a UFO.
So far, the two witnesses I talked to from the Ariel School incident both said that their parents supported them, or one said her mother really supported her. And, that is important. I can imagine these, poor kids have to live with, this type of thing and not to get the support. That's really sad, and I'm sure that does happen a lot because, kids do have an imagination, but as a group, it's hard to explain when something happens as a group.
I would definitely ask parents to listen to their students, because there was one case in 1975 from Leonard Stringfield, great researcher, who got a call from a very frantic father saying, my son has gone missing. And Leonard's like, why are you calling me? He says, well, my son called you yesterday to report a UFO, which, he had gotten the message, but he wasn't home. Turns out this kid thought he was going to be abducted. He left a note on the kitchen table. Parents read it. He had seen a UFO follow him home from school the day before.
Wow. His
parents did not believe him when he said it's following him and it's going to take him. So he emptied his bank account of $500, he's a high school student, and took off. And the police were, of course, called. They found him at Atlanta Airport. This is in Georgia. And Leonard Stringfield got the whole story out of him. It turns out that a year earlier, he had seen a UFO right over the playground at his high school and felt like it was after him. Went home that night and had a bedroom visitation by, short, bald, large-eyed humanoids who said, don't be afraid, but you need to come with us. So he lived with this for a year without any support.
Wow. Wow, that's interesting. Now, is your favorite case when it comes to the schoolyard sightings, is it one of the well-known ones, or is it something that we haven't heard about?
I would say it's probably most people haven't heard. Some of my favorite cases for sure. I'm going to say the Ocean Knoll case on May 6, 1967 is one of my favorite. This involved 16 elementary students, very young, and at least one teacher who at school, as it was beginning, saw this craft come down over the school. It hovered for several moments. It had a large picture window in front, and through it they could see 2 or 3 humanoids. This thing goes, and it apparently lands next to the school. It's in a dark, deep canyon right next to the school, so children ran up to the fence. They couldn't see where it went back into the school, and about an hour later, recess is out, and all the kids are on the playground with one of the teachers, and this thing rises up, and it's right at eye level, and these kids are looking at it. One kid had binoculars, and they said these were not humans. They couldn't describe them really well because they were just sort of silhouettes, but they said their faces looked a little lumpy or looked like they were wearing masks and had uniforms on, and it was just this metallic ship, not too large, rises up about 100 feet over the school, circles around it 3 times, and takes off. And the teacher refused to discuss it and told the students that they were not to discuss it. One of the main witnesses, she comes home from school. She's like 7 years old. Says, Daddy, this thing came over the school. And he freaks out. He gets the whole story out of her and goes back to the school. And the teacher will not talk to him, won't talk to him. And he tried to talk to the other students, and they were too scared or refused to talk about it. He found several students who would talk about it, finally, and got the same story that he got from his daughter. She's like, Daddy, it was like 2 plates stuck together. She described the whole thing. Took him a while to get the story out of her. And he tried to get the police interested. No. The news wasn't interested. Finally, he got some support. I think it was from Newfork. So I was able to find this report, the audio of the whole interview online. It was a great interview,
Oh, wow.
and I don't think it's ever been publicized before.
Wow, wasn't that interesting? And any details that were really fascinating in that interview?
Really, just the ones that I've already told you. How close the UFO was, and the fact that so many kids saw that the teacher refused to talk about it. Yeah, and it's just got a lot of interesting sort of little tidbits to it. The way it was you can see how there's more events like this that we're not hearing about. The way this was covered up, because if the teacher's not going to talk about it, you're pretty much at a loss. There's another case that's somewhat similar at Downy Elementary School. This is also in California by coincidence, in 1977, where a bunch of elementary age students saw this object over the playground, and none of the teachers saw it. But the students certainly talked about it, and it was the talk of the school. Turns out one of the witnesses had a parent who taught there. And so this spread like wildfire through the school. But that's as far as it went, just to the teachers and parents.
Wow. We are going to be taking calls here. I actually see a couple coming in. They're going to be screened by Race over at KGRA. So we have them coming in, and as soon as he screens the call, I'll be taking that. So I do want to also ask you, what is the, you said that was one of your favorite cases, but are there cases also that are really interesting that involve like beings besides the ones you've already talked about?
Oh yeah, like the one witness I talked to, Melody was her name. Wow, that's an amazing case. This occurred in 1966, which by the way was a huge year. This is when the sort of whole schoolyard UFO phenomenon exploded with the Hillsdale College incident in Michigan, followed 2 weeks later by the Melbourne, Australia case. But yeah, this case at Point Elementary School in St. Louis, Missouri, 1966, began with 6 kids who decided that they were not going to, play foursquare that day, that afternoon. They were going to go play tag at the far end of the field, which they did, and were running around when they saw these footprints, really small bipedal footprints that they couldn't make sense of. And they were looking at them when someone saw a light in the trees behind the school and said, "What's that?" And their first thought was ice cream truck. There were no roads there. There was a little farmhouse, but even though there's no roads to it, they go running beyond the boundary of the school where they're not supposed to. It's not that far. It's right there. And they run up, and there's a craft. It's landed. It's got white lights on it. It's not very large. It's silver, metallic. And there is a being that's twice as close to them as the craft, maybe 50 feet away, 20 feet initially. And all the kids line up in a row and look at this being. And the witness was very interested to hear if I'd ever heard of the description quite like what she had. And I had to say, no, not exactly. She described a very muscular body. She says it looked like a gymnast. And dark-skinned or had a very dark jumpsuit on and a dark face, too. She can't really remember the eyes other than that they were compelling and large and probably dark. A bald, large head, but not a gray by any means. She says it looked more like a gorilla, its face. is
Wow.
what it sort of reminded her of. And this thing locked eyes with the witnesses the entire time. As soon as they showed up, it stared at them and they stared back. And it started backing up slowly and walking towards its craft. It passed a cow on the way. There were 6 cows at this little farmhouse, right? 6, maybe it was 4. Touches the cow. The cow flops over unconscious.
Cow tipping. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And at this point, there's a scream behind them. It's the teacher, Miss Ollendorf, and she's not happy about what she's seeing. She's terrified. She's absolutely hysterical. Grabs the children and pulls them inside and forces the entire playground inside at this point. And now the students know there's something out there. They rush into the classroom and they rush straight to the windows because you can still see the craft. You cannot see the being, but you can see the lights through the trees. And the teacher's frantically putting the shades down, trying to get the students from not looking, which of course didn't work. She calls the other teachers and the principal, and they close down the school for the day. This happens in a number of cases where schools cut short. They herded all the kids into the auditorium, and there were no windows in the auditorium, just very high ones that overlooked the sky. And one of the kids shouts out, because they were all trying to look for this thing, and he goes, "There it goes!" And says he saw this thing take off.
Wow.
At this point, all the kids are, being bussed home. The school buses were called, and there are at least 4 witnesses who remember this. I'm trying to get a hold of some of the others who apparently are willing to talk. But yeah,
Wow.
It's an amazing case.
To me, this is one of the most amazing cases. I mean,
right, the Rua Zimbabwe case is not unique, is what I'm saying.
yeah.
This is occurring all over the place.
Wow. We have 3 calls waiting, so I'm going to take the first one. Right here, Steve in Las Vegas. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martin. Hi, Preston. 2 quick questions, if I may. I keep asking myself, why would these UFOs, ETs, get so close to children? Do you think maybe it's because children are more open-minded, they're more easier, no hostilities within a child, or why children?
Yeah, I think you've got it exactly right, Steve. Because an adult often has a fear reaction. These kids generally don't. They don't know what a UFO is, and at least half the cases, they have no interpretation to this, and it becomes a very effective method for the ETs to fulfill their agenda, which is to sort of get a universal belief in UFOs, which we see very strongly in the younger generations for sure. And yeah, this affects them for a very long time. They're very impressionable. And these witnesses often come away, becoming UFO investigators, writing a book about it, becoming very interested in science or metaphysics or, things like this. So it definitely affects them. They're very impressionable. And yeah, I think you're right on the nail with that one.
Okay, and my second question, you are kind of like I consider an expert on the UFOs over California, and there's Luis Alonso had been to Catalina Island. There's going to be a program called UAP Expeditions led by Kevin Day and Dr. Kevin Kinnis, former scientist with NASA, and they plan to go to an expedition along Catalina Island and Guadalupe Island, I think that is, out there searching. Do you still believe that, and I know there's been sightings that there's been fleets of UFOs, 20, 30 flying out there. Do you think there's still a chance of finding that base out there, or, or why they haven't they confer with you, get any information? If I was going out there, you'd be the first person I would like to talk to. I mean, has anybody conferred with you?
Yeah, great question. They have reached out to me. So I am corresponding with them, and I'm excited about it because I tell you, I've been researching this area for well over 10 years. And you're right, there are fleets. It's a very active area in a very defined place, which to me points towards the possibility of a base. There's other reasons I think there's a base there, including whistleblower accounts. There's some unusual geological formations. There's also these cases, like I said, involving 30, 40, 50. a couple of cases over 100 objects. So where are they all coming from? So yeah, I think that there probably is a base out there. I don't know if we'll ever find it or not. But I'm excited about this research that's going on now, and that more attention is being paid to it.
Excellent.
And
Hey,
thank you very much.
thanks. Yeah, we have some more calls coming in. Jack, we have you on, and you're calling from West Palm Beach, Florida, which I will be down there in a few months.
Yep.
How you doing?
Oh, yes. Very good, thanks. I just have one short question, and that is, it'd be very interesting to know if there were one or more instances of missing time in any of those cases.
Yeah, great question, Jack. I wonder about that in some of these cases where people think it's just sightings, because kids would probably slip past missing time pretty easily. And I know there was some confusion about time in the Rua, Zimbabwe case. But as far as we know, it's pretty rare. It does happen. I've got 2 high school cases that do involve apparent missing time. One up in the Missouri area. There was about 50 students having a sort of a, gosh, I should call it not a dance, but sort of a sleepover, a slumber party at the gymnasium, all females. And there was an incident, and apparent missing time. Time was stopped. Grays came in and took about 4 or 5 of the girls out into a UFO which had landed right next to the school, and conducted some sort of physical examination and other physical stuff, put them back in, and everything started up again, and no one was the wiser. So, yes, there are missing time. And there's another one at Conard High School. The gentleman I talked to firsthand had an incident where Grays again walked in, took a wand, struck him on the head. He fainted. He remembered that later. At first he thought his friend had punched him in the face, and sort of used that as a screen memory, which turned out not to be what happened. And he had about a half an hour of missing time, he thinks, along with some other students who were really freaked out and did notice the time loss.
Wow. Very interesting.
Wow. Well, all right. Well, I'll let you get on to the next caller. Very interesting. Love listening to your presentations. I love the way you present a lot of cases. It's better to me than more the disclosure talk and the politics. But, well, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks. And let's see. We have someone trying to call in. Hopefully that will be answered. For right now, we're going to bring in Ryan from South Carolina. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Martin. How you doing?
Good. How are you? Can you speak up a little, please?
How you doing?
Well, thank you. You have a question for our guest?
It's been a long time. Yeah, it's been a long time, hasn't it? Let me see. Yeah, I wanted to ask him, has he ever done any kind of statistical analysis of the number of these sightings versus time, to kind of compare how this works as far as the public consciousness is, as far as UFOs go? In other words, has there been a spike in these sightings versus the points where UFOs have entered the public consciousness like they did in the 70s and 80s and so on?
Wow, that's a great question. I haven't, but I can tell you that it did all sort of go under the radar until about 1966 when the Hillsdale, Michigan incident occurred. 87 students saw this, as well as school officials, police officers. This thing hovered over the school for about 2 hours and did land in front of the school at one point. And 2 weeks later was the Melbourne, Australia incident. 1 year to the day after that was Opalaka. There's a lot of weird cases where there'll be an incident, and then 2 weeks later, another. Or a year later. It's sort of weird timing to it. But I haven't been able to relate it to sort of the belief in UFOs or the, how society is reacting to the UFO phenomena, other than that people, the witnesses who saw this stuff, remember it for the rest of their lives. They're like, I think about this every day. Is a very common sort of reaction. And to some, it has a profound effect on their life. Some actually do have visitations following these sightings.
Really? Wow. Oh.
Because it's almost like these reports, kind of spike at certain points when you think about it statistically. I mean, after Betty and Barney Hill reported their kidnapping, and after Roswell became big in the 80s, and that, so on and so forth, they just kind of spike. I mean, I'm not calling anyone faking anything. I'm just saying they do statistically kind of spike, at certain points.
Yeah, it's about 1 or 2 cases per year, if you average it out statistically, 2 to 3. But I'm thinking it's a lot more than that.
Wow. Hey, Ryan, we have a little trouble with your phone, so we're going to say goodnight, but thank you very much for the question.
Hey, good to hear from you.
All right, thanks. All right, so we have Bob on line 1 from Michigan. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Hello, thanks.
Can't hear you, Bob. Say it again.
Yes, I said thank you. Good to get through. I heard Preston mention Hillsdale College in Michigan, and since I'm from Michigan and I've been there, I was curious about that case. If he has anything more to say about that, or
Sure.
a description of that case, I'd be interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they described this object, other than what I've already talked about. It came very close to the dorms. It hovered for quite some time, doing some really fantastic maneuvers as if showing off. The police were going to shoot at it. The other officer said, no, don't. It won't. That's probably not a good idea. This caused a huge public uproar when J. Allen Hynek showed up after the incident and explained it away as swamp gas.
Oh, that one.
Turns out that Representative Ford was, representing Michigan at the time, became president, and he had promised to sort of divulge the UFO information, never really did, but this did lead to a congressional investigation, sort of indirectly, into UFOs, the first congressional investigation, and also sort of spelled the end of Blue Book, Project Blue Book, who was looking for a way out, and around that time had, found a way out. And this was sort of the low point in J. Allen Hynek's career, he said, because it was a circus. And he knew at this point that UFOs were probably real, and he was done towing the party line. And eventually, went against the Air Force and said this is a real phenomena, when the Air Force was still heavily into denial, and still are for that matter.
Okay, I just didn't realize that Hillsdale College was part of that, the whole swamp gas thing.
Yeah, me neither.
Very influential case, and sort of had a real impact on society.
That is something.
Okay, yeah, I think the swamp gas case encompassed several sightings all around the same time, right?
That's the one that popularized it for sure. That's the one, the swamp gas explanation that really took off and was widely published.
All right, Bob.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for the call. And good night. So the lines are open. If anyone wants to give us a ring, that number is 85KGRA live or 855-472-5483. Lines are open. When you mentioned that these things are covered up, I just wondered, was there any cases that you're aware of where it was really hard to get the information from because of it was sort of covered up, like nobody talked about it, it was out of the press, anything like that that was really interesting that you found?
Not currently, because currently there's a much more openness to this. I think we're looking at a society now that mostly believes in UFOs. And these students have stuck to their stories almost universally. And the famous cases like Broadhaven in Wales and the Melbourne case and the Opelika, Florida case, they have memorials set up. So people are pretty open to it at this point, and think that the cover-up that we see is sort of an open conspiracy right now and is slowly crumbling because our government is so neck deep in this stuff and has so much stuff to cover up that this is small fries. They don't care. It is unfortunate that a lot of these cases weren't more fully investigated. And hopefully that will change because I think this is still going on.
Well,
that's what the evidence is showing. These cases are relatively current.
Wow, interesting. We have Michael, just waiting for him to go on hold. He is calling from Connecticut, and I think it's Connecticut. Welcome to the show, Michael. Where are you calling from?
Cincinnati.
Oh, Cincinnati. That's what it is. Okay. Welcome to the show. And we have all of a sudden we have other callers calling in. Yeah. Thanks. Do you have a question for our guest?
Yeah, Preston's pretty with it as far as cases. I remember hearing a case at a high school near me in the late 60s, Mariemont High School in Cincinnati. I believe it was on the weekend. A high school dance was happening, and there was sightings outside of the dance, so outside the high school then. And I just wondered if that rang a bell to him.
About what year? It does not ring a bell. Miramonte,
It was in the late 60s. It was probably 66, 67, like that.
Yeah, no, I don't have that case. I don't know about it, but it's good.
Okay, and another thing I'd like to add is I think one of the main reasons that children are selected in schools, children don't carry weapons at all.
Wow.
So I just wanted to point that out. But thanks for taking my call.
Thank you. That's an interesting point. We have other callers waiting on hold, but go ahead and address that if you'd like to. I never thought of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's true so much today, but
yeah, that's true.
I hope it is. Yeah, but the fact that mostly elementary schools are targeted is significant, I think, because the children are very special witnesses. They remember this stuff very vividly. Like we said, they have no judgment, no preconceptions.
Yeah.
And large groups of them. So if it was one or two students, trying to pull up a hoax, well, you could probably catch it pretty quickly, anyway, because when students, when really young children particularly lie, they're pretty transparent about it, for an adult at least, to spot it.
Yeah.
And that's not what we're seeing in these cases. In the Ruiz and Babel case, it was pretty clear from the beginning that these kids were telling the truth. That was true in the Broadhaven case. It's true in the Rosieval case, and gosh, that was in England. It's all over the world. It's amazing how pervasive and just ubiquitous this phenomena is.
Right. Speaking of all over the world, we have Bob calling from Denmark. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Greetings.
Greetings.
I would like to ask the researcher if he has made any of his research available online. What I'm really missing a lot of researchers doing research, but they don't seem to publish any in a searchable format.
Right. I do have a website where I publish, all my book, not the entirety of the books, but certainly large excerpts, and do try to publish my research, because I know there's an enormous number of great researchers who are sitting on loads of data, and it's very annoying. And I try to at least publish everything that I'm working very hard at that, publishing all my research, and do try to make some available for free as well.
And sounds. Hang on just one second, Bob. This sounds like a good time to plug your book. So why don't you go ahead and give the full title to that and where someone can find it.
Yeah, the book is called Schoolyard UFO Encounters. It's available on Amazon and other online booksellers. I do have a website. If you just Google my name, it should take you right there, PrestonDennett.weebly.com. You can buy the book through there or contact me if you have a case you want to share or a question or a comment. I always love hearing from people.
Yeah.
And, this book, the there are cases here that really sort of brought me to the edge of tears because we're dealing with very young children here.
Yeah.
It blew me away having researched UFOs for this long, and finding this out was quite a shock.
Wow. Bob, did you have anything to add or ask?
Yes. My second question is, when you researched all of these cases, did you find any place where you could research multiple cases at the same time? For example, I want to see all cases with more than 30 simultaneous witnesses.
No, I'm not quite sure I understand what you're asking me.
So you said you researched. Yes. Sorry.
I have talked to multiple witnesses for a single case, or I'm trying to do that at least in some of these cases. And it's pretty rare for a UFO to visit the same school twice, although that does happen. But usually it's, the same part of the same incident. It'll come like over a period of days, if that's what you mean.
No, I mean that you don't make research available in a database format yourself, but did you find other places available online where you can do that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, there are online databases like the National UFO Reporting Center, Mutual UFO Network, and a number of others.
And are the cases cataloged so you can search by attributes, for example, more than 30 witnesses?
Yeah, there are cases on there. I know the Crestview case has got quite a bit of information online, as does the major cases.
I think you misunderstand what I'm asking. I'm asking, were you able to search and get a list of all the cases they have with more than 30 witnesses per case, or involving children, or whatever attribute they have indexed?
I believe
no.
I believe, Preston, what he's trying to ask is, are you able to search through a categorization? In other words, like the children's ages, perhaps, or how many witnesses were involved, that type
like
of thing.
Like a normal database. Did you find any place where research was presented in a searchable format?
No, not in a way that I would have liked. So it caused a lot of reading, and I had to go through these cases individually looking for them. You can do sort of find on page searches where you can pull a word out, that sort of thing. But yeah, in terms of finding multiple witness cases, that was very difficult because of the problem you're talking about right now. Took a lot of time.
Okay.
Well, thank you for the call.
I want to say thank you, and that's all. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Thanks for the call, Bob. All right. Next, we have Gil calling from Roswell, New Mexico. Welcome to the show, Gil.
Hey, how you doing, Martin? Great show.
Thank you. Thank you. You have a question for Preston tonight?
Yes, matter of fact, I do, sir. I'm calling in the middle of your podcast here, and but I wanted to ask him, has he done any research on how do I say this? People that have experienced either close encounters 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever around either nuclear sites, or as Walker Air Force Base. Have they been maybe more encounters or maybe abductions around hot spots like here at Walker in the 60s, where the B-52s was loaded down, ready to go to Cuba in the Cuban Missile Crisis, or like up there in Minot and around up there, any more activity with sightings, abductions, or anything like that? And then I do have a statement after that.
Yeah, I think that nuclear power stations, anything at all to do with nuclear stuff, missiles, is a big UFO attractor. And we do see large clusters of sightings. Holloman Air Force Base was a veritable UFO magnet,
Absolutely.
For years and years. And we do see clusters of abductions around Air Force bases, which do seem to be a little bit higher than normal. I haven't really looked into that in a way that I can, prove that. But I've certainly noticed it. And I'm like, wow, this is right next to an Air Force base again. So
Well,
I wonder about that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I grew up around Walker, and I was born in '63. My brother-in-law was an MP out there and guarded the B-52s. And from a young age, from 8, was a really unusual encounter that night, and me being 8 years old. And I've heard other people say the year when they turn 8 years old that they've had unusual, encounters or sightings. And also, my first daylight sighting was at the age of 12, and that was in early February of 1975. And 4 crafts. And believe me, when I was growing up around Walker, you seen everything in the sky. From the heavy skyhook helicopters to the huge weather balloons that they had set off from Holloman, Alamogordo, White Sands Missile Range, and you would see them at the stratosphere, and they'd mushroom out. Well, these was not what me and my father and I saw. We saw many crafts that was absolutely, not that we'd ever seen before that flew out of this air base, this world famous Air Force base. But I was just wondering like that because they seems like to me that there's a lot of sightings and actually abductions around this area that I've talked to. And believe me, I didn't know anything about the 47 crash. My aunt and uncle was out here, and my mother and father at that time, and my uncle was a fireman. And they didn't recollect that at all. Of course, he could have been off or, off duty or whatever. But anyway, I thought I'd get your input on that.
Yeah, I do believe the Roswell incident occurred for sure. I mean, there's far too many witnesses for this to have been a hoax or a mogul balloon or anything like that. So as far as I have looked into the Roswell incident, I wrote a book called UFOs over New Mexico, which sort of documented the activity in that state. And it's a very active state for sure. And I think it's largely because of the research into nuclear power that took place there.
Very well could be. Thanks for the call. Thanks for the call.
Thank you, Martin.
All
Great
right.
show.
Have a good night.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
All right. The lines are open, and that number is, again, 855-472-5483. All right. I'm going to ask you this question. What is the weirdest schoolyard encounter that you can think of in all this research you've done?
Yeah, well, do you remember the Lonnie Zamora landing?
Oh, yes.
Very, very famous. 3 days after that, there was a sighting at Lowell Elementary School. The main witness, Sharon Stull, saw this object, egg-shaped. Her sister, Rob.
Just 1 second. Where is that located?
This is Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Albuquerque, okay.
Yeah, not far from where Lonnie Zamora had his sighting, really. Mm-hmm. Right where this guy, the former caller, is talking about. So coincidence there, but at any rate, this was, I believe 1964, something like that. April 29th, 1964. And the whole playground apparently saw this thing, but no one was really paying much attention to it. Sharon was very intrigued by it and watched this thing for the entire duration of recess, went back into class afterwards. The thing came very low at some point, was bobbing around, doing weird movements, like yo-yo movements and pendulum movements and things like this, and went back into class and started to feel unwell and rushed to the nurse because her face felt like it was on fire. And the nurse was very alarmed and said, "You've got, second-degree burns here. You need to be rushed to the emergency room," and was diagnosed with second-degree burns. Her eyes swelled up pretty bad. She couldn't read or had to wear dark glasses, had lotion applied and the whole deal, and started to feel really strange beyond that. Very disoriented. There's a number of cases where Students describe like giddiness or weird feelings inside their head, things like this. And she was describing something that seemed similar to this, but what was most unusual is in the 3 weeks following this sighting, she was apparently beamed by this thing because she grew about a foot and became much more mature. Yeah, became much more mature. Now, we've seen this in plants. There's a number of cases out there all across the world, really, where UFOs have struck plant life and accelerated its growth. I know of a case in California, a case in Colorado. I know Jacques Vallée investigated cases like this. But this is, as far as I know, one of the few cases involving this sort of thing. But I've heard others. I had someone contact me on Facebook, and he's like, I grew 2 inches following my encounter. And that's what happened that's happened to John Hunter Gray as well.
Wow.
A very well-known, speaker on this subject.
Jack and the Beanstalk. We have 4 minutes left, and we have a couple of callers waiting here. So let's bring in Vince from Ohio. Welcome to the show, Vince.
Hi, Martin. Hi, Preston. Let me say, I apologize if it's been asked already, but you got interested in the UFO field because of sightings that your family had seen or experiences your family had seen. Can you give us details on that, please?
Yeah, I'd say I mentioned earlier my brother saw a UFO. It was a metallic saucer. He had his 2 friends with him. I'm like, Marco, you're kidding. He's like, no, Phil and Greg were there. So I immediately called up Phil and Greg, and they all described this metallic saucer with colored lights on it. Now, my sister-in-law described a sighting over Van Nuys Air Force Reserve Base, and then later told me she saw gray ETs. And I'm like, where did you see them? She says it was right in front of Stagg Street Elementary School in Van Nuys. And so I'm like, whoa, in front of an elementary school? You got to be kidding. She's like, no, they were right there under the spotlight. She was 10 feet away from them and described them very well as your typical gray that we know now. So that was another real chink in my armor. And when I brought it up at work, I got a real shock. The lady's like, oh, yeah, my whole family saw these objects darting around for over an hour. And in walks Dorothy. And she's like, oh, UFOs? One followed me and my sister home from the library. We live 5 minutes away. Don't know what happened. We left at 9, didn't get home till 10:15.
Wow. There's so much of it when you ask. Vince, thanks for the call. I'm going to have to let you go because we only have a couple minutes left. We have one other caller. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. We have Andy. Quick question. Andy, thank you for joining the show. And quick question for Preston, and you're from Connecticut. Thanks for the call.
Yeah. Thanks for taking my call, guys. Good show. I just wanted Preston's opinion real quick that, given his long past of studying UFOs and all the literature out there that's available to us all, wouldn't he say that it's probably likely that the issue of with the extraterrestrial hypothesis is far more complex than a lot of people would make it out to be, with there just being a few races here and there, that it's just like here on Earth, we've got good people, bad people, and everybody in between. And I'll take his answer off the air. So thanks again, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, we have 1 minute.
All right.
So if you can answer that in a minute. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. It's far more complicated. I do believe we're dealing with ETs in the classic sense, but there's an extra, an interdimensional aspect to all of this. There's many more races. There's a huge cover-up. There's layers and layers to this phenomena that is hard to unravel. I think we're going to see open official contact at some point. I think we're going to see ongoing disclosure. There's going to be a lot of movement in this field as time goes on, but we'll see how it rolls out.
Yeah, thanks for making that a quick answer. And I want to say thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And one more time, Schoolyard UFO Encounters, and you can get that on Amazon and also on your website.
That's right.
All right. Thanks again, Preston. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Hey, thanks very much.
All right. All right, everyone. So thanks so much for joining the show. Next week, we have a real sciencey show. We have astrophysicist Jeffrey Bennett on, and after him, we have Deep Prasad. And he is a a quantum physicist. He's going to be talking about UFOs. Should be a real nice science, if you like science. It'll be a nice sciencey show, and we welcome you to join us. So I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week, and keep your eyes to the sky.